She asked the lonely rancher for a job, and he said, "Only if you marry me by sunset." Clara tightened the straps of her small, worn backpack and took a deep breath as she stepped off the dusty road. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the rolling hills that stretched as far as her eyes could see. She had been walking for hours, the soles of her shoes worn thin, but she didn't mind the fatigue. Her mind was focused, determined, and filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She had left her small hometown weeks ago, carrying only a few belongings and a quiet determination to find work. Her family's farm had been sold after years of drought and debt, leaving her with no choice but to seek a new path. The sight of the ranch brought a strange feeling of awe mixed with apprehension. It was larger than she had imagined, surrounded by fences that marked the boundaries of a sprawling property. Cattle grazed lazily in the distance, and the occasional crow cawed from a nearby tree. The barn, sturdy and weathered, stood near the center of the property, its red paint faded by the sun. Clara could see smoke rising from a chimney, suggesting someone was inside. As she walked along the gravel driveway, she practiced what she would say, running through her words silently. "Excuse me, sir. My name is Clara. I'm looking for work. I can help with anything, feeding the animals, cleaning, cooking, whatever you need." She whispered the lines to herself like a prayer, hoping they would sound confident when spoken aloud. A figure emerged from the barn, moving slowly and deliberately. He was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a ruggedness that spoke of years spent working outdoors. His hands were calloused, his skin tanned and weathered by the sun, and his dark hair was flecked with gray. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp, cautious, and filled with a quiet intensity that made her stomach tighten. Clara straightened her back and called out, "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for work. I heard you might need help on the ranch." The man paused, his gaze assessing her from head to toe. He didn't speak immediately, and the silence made Clara's heart race. She could feel the sweat forming at the back of her neck, partly from the heat and partly from nerves. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low but steady. "You're asking for work," he said. His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried an edge of suspicion. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "I can do anything you need. I just need a chance." He studied her for a long moment, then let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of many years. "I might have work for you," he said slowly, "but there's a condition." Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "A condition," she repeated. The man nodded. "You have to agree to marry me by sunset." For a moment, Clara thought he was joking. Her eyes widened and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She took a small step back, her mind spinning. The sun was still high enough in the sky that sunset felt far away, yet the demand made her heart race with fear and confusion. She had expected a job offer, maybe a trial period or even a test of her skills, but marriage, by sunset. I don't understand," she stammered. Why would you ask that?" The man's face remained serious. He didn't smile or laugh, and there was no trace of jest in his tone. "I'm not cruel," he said finally. "But this ranch has been in my family for generations, and I've been alone here for many years. I need someone who can be part of this life permanently. If you want to work here, you must be willing to share that life fully. That's my condition." Clara felt a wave of shock and disbelief. She had faced hardship before, but she had never been confronted with a choice so sudden, so impossible. She thought of her family's struggles, of the small apartment she now called home, of the bills that would soon come due. She thought of the miles she had walked, of the hope that had kept her moving forward, and of the strange pull she felt toward this quiet, solitary rancher. Her mind raced with questions. Was he lonely? Was this a test of character? Was he desperate, or was there some other reason behind this strange demand? She looked at him, studying his face, trying to read the emotions hidden behind his calm exterior. She could see a flicker of vulnerability there, a trace of sadness that softened the hard lines of his face. Clara shook her head, trying to focus on what mattered most: survival. She had to think clearly, even as fear and confusion twisted in her stomach. I need time," she said finally. "I can't decide something like that right now." The man nodded slowly as if he had expected this. "I understand," he said, "but time is short. The choice is yours. If you want work here, you must decide before sunset. If not, then you'll have to find another way." Clara took another step back, her heart pounding. She needed to leave, to think, to breathe, but she didn't want to turn her back on the only opportunity that might save her from financial ruin. She looked at the ranch one more time, at the open fields and the barn, at the man who seemed as much a part of this land as the soil itself. She felt a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and something she couldn't quite name, an almost magnetic pull toward the ranch and its keeper. Turning away, she walked down the driveway, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and questions. She replayed the conversation over and over, trying to make sense of it. How could someone demand marriage in exchange for work? What kind of man would do that? And yet, there was something in his eyes, something in the way he spoke, that made her hesitate. As she reached the edge of the property, Clara paused and looked back. The man was standing near the barn, watching her leave, his posture rigid but not threatening. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she felt a strange connection, an unspoken understanding that there was more to this story than either of them had shared. Clara walked away from the ranch and into the small town nearby, where she found a modest inn to rest and think. She sat by the window, watching the sun inch lower in the sky, and tried to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She felt fear, yes, but also a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a way to navigate this strange situation, to find work without giving up her freedom, to understand the man behind the unusual demand. That evening, as the town grew quiet and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Clara made a decision. She would return to the ranch at sunrise. She would confront the man again, not with fear but with courage and clarity. She would ask questions, set boundaries, and demand respect. She would not allow desperation to dictate her life, but she would also not let pride close the door to the one opportunity that might change everything. Clara lay awake that night, thinking of the ranch, of the man who had startled her with his unexpected proposal, and of the path she must now take. She thought of the miles she had walked to reach this place, of the determination that had carried her this far, and of the inner strength she had often doubted existed. She realized that whatever happened next, she would face it head-on, with honesty, courage, and a willingness to see the truth, no matter how strange or frightening it might be. The sun rose the next morning with a soft, golden glow. Clara packed her belongings, her heart steady despite the uncertainty that awaited her. She walked toward the ranch, each step carrying the weight of her past struggles and the fragile hope for a better future. As she approached the driveway, she took a deep breath and reminded herself, she was not a passive observer in her own life. She was strong, resourceful, and capable of making difficult decisions. And today, she would face the rancher again, not as a frightened young woman seeking mercy, but as someone ready to take control of her destiny. The ranch came into view once more, bathed in the soft morning light. The barn doors were open, the animals moving about their morning routine. And there, standing near the gate, was the man who had startled her with his unusual proposal. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Clara felt fear, yes, but also a sense of purpose. She knew that whatever happened next, she would face it with courage, dignity, and the determination to protect herself while seeking the opportunity she had come so far to find. She stepped forward, her back straight, her head held high, ready to speak, ready to listen, ready to navigate the complicated, unexpected path that had been placed before her. The rancher's expression softened slightly, as if he recognized the determination in her eyes, and Clara felt the first spark of understanding that perhaps, beneath his strange demand, there was a man who had been as lonely and uncertain as she had been. And so, the day began, with uncertainty and possibility intertwined, as Clara stepped into the ranch, and into a chapter of her life that would test her courage, challenge her values, and ultimately show her the strength she had always carried within herself. Clara walked back into the small town, the dusty road crunching beneath her shoes. Her mind was still spinning from the strange encounter at the ranch. She could not stop thinking about Jacob, the rancher with the serious eyes, the quiet voice, and the unusual demand that had stunned her. She had asked for work, for a chance to earn a living, and instead he had told her she could only have that opportunity if she agreed to marry him by sunset. The idea seemed absurd, almost unreal. Yet the memory of his eyes, filled with a quiet intensity, lingered in her mind. There was more to him than she could see at first glance, and somehow that intrigued her even as it frightened her. Clara found a small inn on the edge of the town, its whitewashed walls simple but welcoming. She rented a modest room with a window that looked out over the street. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she pulled out a notebook and began writing, as if putting her thoughts on paper could help untangle the confusion in her mind. She wrote about the miles she had traveled, the challenges she had faced, and the strange proposition that had stopped her in her tracks. She paused often, staring out the window at the trees swaying in the wind, wondering what she should do. Her family's farm had failed, leaving her with nothing but determination. She could not afford to walk away from this chance. Yet, she could not bring herself to accept a demand so extreme, a choice that forced her to give up her freedom in exchange for work. The very idea seemed wrong, but she could not deny the desperate circumstances that had brought her here. Clara spent the rest of the afternoon pacing her room, trying to make sense of it all. She thought of the local people who had whispered about Jacob, the lonely rancher who had lost his wife years ago and now lived in isolation. Some said he was kind, others said he was stubborn and hard to approach. She wondered which version was true. Could a man who asked such a strange thing also be capable of kindness? Could he be lonely and desperate, or was there something more calculating behind his words? Her stomach twisted as she considered her options. If she returned to the ranch, she risked humiliation, perhaps even danger. If she walked away, she risked financial ruin and the disappointment of her family. The choice seemed impossible. Yet, she knew deep down that she could not ignore her own instincts. She had faced hardship before, but this was different. This was not about surviving a drought or fixing a broken fence. This was about deciding the course of her life in the face of someone else's strange demands. As evening settled over the town, Clara stepped outside and walked to a small park near the inn. The air was cool, carrying the scent of grass and earth. She watched the sky turn pink and orange as the sun began its descent. The beauty of it was almost cruel, she thought, for she was caught in a situation filled with uncertainty and fear. Yet, she could not deny a small spark of curiosity about Jacob. There was something in his eyes and the way he had spoken that suggested he was not entirely what he seemed. She remembered the way he had watched her, his gaze steady and intense. It had been almost as if he were measuring her character, weighing her courage, and deciding if she was worthy of the opportunity. She shivered at the memory. What kind of man would put someone in such a position? And yet, there had been no cruelty in his voice, only a strange, quiet seriousness. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by the innkeeper, a kind woman with gentle eyes who had noticed the young woman's restless state. "You look troubled, dear," she said softly. "Is everything all right?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head. "It's complicated," she admitted. "I've come here looking for work and I think I found an opportunity, but it's unusual. Strange things were said and I'm not sure what to do." The innkeeper nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes the world puts us in difficult situations," she said gently. You have to listen to your instincts. Don't let anyone force you to make a decision you're not ready for. But also, sometimes opportunities come in strange forms. You might have to be brave in ways you didn't expect. Clara appreciated the words. She returned to her room, but sleep came slowly. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining the ranch, the wide fields, the barn, and the man who had surprised her with his unusual demand. She thought about the work she could do there, the skills she had learned growing up on her family's farm. She could feed the animals, tend the fields, mend fences, and cook. She could prove herself capable if only she had the chance. But the idea of marriage, especially so suddenly and with so much pressure, was terrifying. She had never been in a relationship that required such a life-altering decision overnight. She thought about her independence, her dreams, and the life she wanted to build for herself. Could she really give that up, even for stability? Could she trust a man she barely knew to make a choice that would affect the rest of her life? The next morning, Clara rose early. The sky was painted in shades of soft blue and gold, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside her window. She packed her small bag carefully, making sure she had enough food, water, and supplies for the day. She knew she would have to confront Jacob again, and this time she wanted to be prepared, not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted to understand him, to see the man behind the strange demand, and to find a way to negotiate a fair agreement if possible. As she walked toward the ranch, Clara rehearsed her words silently. She would speak with honesty and courage. She would set boundaries and demand respect. She would not let fear or desperation make her submit to something she could not accept. And yet, she also carried a small, cautious hope that perhaps Jacob was not as harsh or unreasonable as he seemed. Perhaps there was a way to work together, to find mutual understanding and to build something, at least professional if not personal, that could benefit them both. When she reached the edge of the ranch, Clara paused. The morning light illuminated the fields, the barn, and the cattle moving about in their pens. Jacob was already outside, tending to the animals. He looked up as she approached, his expression calm but attentive. For a brief moment, they simply observed each other, two people standing in the quiet of the morning, aware of the weight of the day ahead. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. "I've thought a lot about what you said yesterday. I want work, but I cannot agree to something as sudden and serious as marriage by sunset. I hope we can find another way." Jacob's eyes softened slightly, and he nodded. "I expected you might say that," he replied quietly. "I was not certain how you would respond." "I appreciate your honesty. That is a rare quality." Clara felt a small flicker of relief. She had spoken her truth and he had listened. But the tension was still there, a silent question hanging between them. Could they find a way to work together without forcing either of them into an impossible situation? For the rest of the morning, Clara observed Jacob as he tended to the ranch. She watched him feed the animals, repair fences, and check the water supply. There was a rhythm to his work, a careful attention to detail, and a deep connection to the land that was almost palpable. She began to understand why the rancher's life was so solitary and why he might have feared losing someone capable and trustworthy. As the day progressed, Clara and Jacob exchanged words sparingly but meaningfully. She asked questions about the ranch, its history, and the work required. He answered patiently, explaining the routines, the challenges, and the care needed to maintain the property. Clara listened intently, learning not just about the work, but also about the man who had shocked her with his proposal. She could see glimpses of his humanity, the moments when he smiled at a young calf, the way he spoke to the horses with gentle authority, the quiet reflection as he looked out over the fields. By mid-afternoon, Clara began to feel a strange mixture of respect and curiosity. She still could not accept the demand he had made, but she could begin to see him not as a tyrant or villain, but as a man shaped by loneliness, responsibility, and a desire for connection. She realized that the ranch was not just land. It was a part of him, and perhaps his unusual request had been a misguided attempt to protect it, to ensure it would not be left in the wrong hands. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Clara knew she had to make a decision. She could not agree to marriage on his terms, but she could negotiate. She could offer her skills, and she could demonstrate her worth. She approached him as he repaired a fence near the barn. "I cannot agree to marry you by sunset," she said firmly but politely. "But I am willing to work here. I want to prove that I can contribute, that I can help maintain the ranch and support you. If you are willing to give me a chance, I will give my best effort." Jacob looked at her for a long moment, studying her face, her posture, and the determination in her eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "I will give you that chance, but understand this. The work is not easy and the ranch demands commitment. You must be prepared for long days, hard labor, and challenges you may not have faced before." Clara felt a surge of relief. She had found a way forward, a compromise that respected both her independence and his need for reliability. She knew the days ahead would be difficult, but she also felt a sense of purpose and possibility she had not experienced in a long time. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara and Jacob worked side by side. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, hard work, and the potential for mutual understanding. Clara realized that sometimes the hardest decisions were not about giving in or walking away, but about finding a path that honored both courage and compassion. And as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Clara understood something important. She was not powerless. She had faced fear, stood up for herself, and taken the first step toward a future she could shape. The ranch and the man who had startled her were no longer obstacles, they were opportunities, and she was ready to embrace them. Clara arrived at the ranch early the next morning. The air was crisp and smelled of earth and grass, a refreshing change from the dusty town she had left behind. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. She carried a small satchel with a few supplies and a notebook where she often wrote her thoughts. Her heart was steady this time. She had thought long and hard about her options, and today she was ready to speak honestly and directly with Jacob. She needed to understand him, and she needed him to understand her. As she walked along the gravel driveway, she saw Jacob feeding the cattle. The animals moved quietly around him, their low moos blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. Jacob was focused, his movements precise and practiced. Clara paused for a moment, watching him. There was a rhythm to his work, a quiet strength that was hard to ignore. She had never seen anyone so connected to their land, so dedicated to every small detail of their ranch. It made her realize that this was not just a job, this was a way of life, a responsibility that he carried alone. Jacob noticed her approaching and straightened. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady but calm. There was no trace of judgment, only observation. "Good morning," Clara replied, taking a deep breath. She stepped closer and spoke clearly. "I've thought a lot about what happened yesterday. I cannot agree to marry you by sunset. That's not something I can do, not because I don't respect you, but because it's too sudden and it's my life. But I do want the work. I want to prove myself. I hope we can find a way to work together without forcing either of us into something uncomfortable." Jacob looked at her for a long moment. His face softened slightly, and she thought she could see a flicker of surprise. "I expected that," he said quietly. "I wondered if you would have the courage to speak honestly. Most people would have left or said yes out of fear. You did not. I respect that." Clara felt a small warmth in her chest. Respect from him was something she had not expected, and it gave her a little hope. She nodded, careful not to show too much emotion. "I'm willing to work hard," she said. "I can feed the animals, cook, clean, repair fences, and take care of the land. I want to earn your trust through my actions, not by agreeing to something I can't commit to." Jacob's eyes softened further. "Very well," he said. "That is fair, but I must be honest with you, Clara. The work is not easy, and the ranch will demand a lot of your time and energy. If you are willing, we can start immediately." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm ready." The rest of the morning passed in a mix of silence and careful conversation. Clara observed Jacob's methods, asking questions when necessary and learning quickly. He showed her how to check the water troughs, how to handle the cattle safely, and how to repair fences efficiently. He was patient but firm, and Clara realized that his life had been shaped by years of self-reliance. He had faced hardships alone, and he expected the same dedication from anyone who worked with him. As they worked side by side, Clara noticed subtle signs of vulnerability in Jacob. When he spoke of his late wife, his voice softened, and his hands moved more gently when tending the animals. He shared stories of the ranch's history, the hard winters, and the long summers spent caring for the land. Clara listened intently, realizing that his demand for marriage had not come from cruelty, but from fear of losing someone who could be trusted, someone who could share the burden of a life spent largely in solitude. By midday, they had completed several tasks together. Clara was tired but satisfied. She had proven to herself that she could handle the work and that her determination could overcome the initial fear she had felt. She had also begun to see Jacob in a new light, not just as a man who had made an impossible demand, but as a human being shaped by loss, responsibility, and a deep need for connection. During a short break, they sat on the porch of the barn, sipping water and watching the cattle graze. Clara decided it was time to speak more openly. "Jacob," she began cautiously, "I want to understand why you made that demand yesterday." "It scared me and I want to know the truth." Jacob looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I have been alone for a long time," he said finally. "I inherited this ranch from my family and I have poured my life into it. I lost my wife many years ago. After she died, I retreated from the world. The ranch became everything to me. But over time, I realized that managing it alone is hard, not just physically, but emotionally. I feared that if someone came to work here, they might leave, or they might not care as much as I do. I made a poor choice in how I asked for help. I thought, if someone was willing to commit completely, they would stay, but I see now that was unfair." Clara nodded slowly, understanding more clearly. "So it wasn't about forcing someone," she said. "It was about fear. You were afraid of losing the ranch or being alone." Jacob's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Yes," he admitted. "I was afraid. I have not had anyone I could trust for a long time. I wanted certainty, and I did not know how to ask for it in a fair way." Clara felt a mix of compassion and caution. She could see the pain behind his words, the loneliness that had shaped his actions. Yet, she also knew that she had to maintain her independence. "I can help," she said gently, "but it has to be because I choose to, not because I'm forced. If you want someone you can trust, earn it with patience, not with ultimatums." Jacob met her gaze, and for the first time a faint smile appeared. "You are wise beyond your years," he said quietly. "I can see that you are not someone who will simply follow orders out of fear. I admire that, and I understand now that trust must be earned, not demanded." The afternoon passed with a quiet rhythm. They worked together repairing fences, checking the water for the livestock, and feeding the animals. Clara moved with purpose and skill, learning quickly and earning Jacob's respect through her actions. They spoke occasionally, exchanging stories of their pasts, of hardships and small victories. The tension from the previous day slowly began to lift, replaced by mutual respect and a growing understanding of each other's character. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara realized something important. The strange demand from yesterday had opened the door to a deeper understanding. She now saw Jacob not as a man with an impossible proposition, but as a human being shaped by loss, responsibility, and a longing for companionship. She also realized that her own courage and honesty had given her a sense of agency she had not felt in a long time. Jacob, for his part, observed Clara with a new perspective. Her determination, her courage, and her willingness to confront him honestly impressed him. He began to understand that his fear had clouded his judgment. Trust could not be demanded, and commitment could not be forced. He had asked the wrong question in the wrong way, but now he saw that Clara was someone who could be a partner, not because of a sudden promise, but because of shared effort, respect, and understanding. By sunset, the ranch was bathed in a soft golden glow. The animals were settling down for the evening, the air was calm, and the fields seemed to breathe with a quiet serenity. Clara and Jacob stood side by side, surveying their work. There was no need for words. The trust they had begun to build was visible in their shared silence, in the way they moved together, and in the mutual respect that had grown over the course of the day. Clara finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I want to continue working here," she said. "I want to help and I want to earn your trust, but it has to be on fair terms. If we can do that, I think we can make this work." Jacob nodded, his expression softening. "I agree," he said. "No ultimatums, no demands. We start fresh and we build trust through our actions." "That is fair. That is right." Clara felt a wave of relief and quiet satisfaction. The fear that had gripped her yesterday was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and possibility. She had faced the challenge, stood her ground, and found a way to navigate the impossible. And in doing so, she had begun to understand Jacob, not just as a man who had made a strange demand, but as a human being with fears, hopes, and a capacity for change. As the last light of the sun faded behind the hills, Clara packed her satchel and prepared to leave the ranch for the evening. But she did so with a sense of optimism she had not felt before. She had taken the first step toward a new chapter, one built on honesty, respect, and the promise of hard work. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she was not walking it alone, and that was a comfort she had not expected to find. Jacob watched her go, a quiet smile on his face. He had learned an important lesson about fear, trust, and the value of honesty. He realized that love, companionship, or loyalty could not be forced. It had to be earned through patience, understanding, and shared effort. And he felt something he had not felt in many years: hope. Clara walked back to the inn, the sky now a deep purple sprinkled with stars. Her heart was light, her mind clear, and her determination stronger than ever. She had faced the impossible, confronted fear, and found a way to move forward with dignity and courage. And she knew that tomorrow, she would return to the ranch ready to continue the work, ready to build trust, and ready to see where this unexpected path might lead. The days turned into weeks, and the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. Clara rose early each morning, eager to face the work ahead. The chores were demanding: feeding cattle, mending fences, checking water troughs, and maintaining the fields. But she tackled each task with energy and determination. Every day she learned something new, not just about ranch work, but about herself. She discovered that she was stronger and more capable than she had ever realized. Jacob watched her quietly, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes stepping back to let her find her own way. He was impressed by her skill, her patience, and her willingness to face challenges without complaint. Slowly, a sense of partnership began to form between them. It was not built on words alone, but on shared effort, trust, and a growing understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. One morning, as the sun rose over the rolling hills, Clara and Jacob were repairing a fence together. The work was physically demanding, but they moved in a rhythm, almost as if they had done it together for years. At one point, Clara accidentally dropped a tool and it clattered to the ground. She bent to pick it up, feeling a little embarrassed. Jacob chuckled softly. "You are too hard on yourself," he said. "Mistakes happen. What matters is how you handle them." Clara smiled. I suppose I've always been taught to aim for perfection, she admitted. But here it's different. I see that effort matters more than perfection. Jacob nodded. Yes. The ranch will forgive mistakes if you keep trying. Life is the same way. Their small conversation marked a turning point. Clara began to see Jacob not just as her employer, but as someone who could understand her, respect her, and even encourage her. And Jacob, in turn, saw Clara not as a temporary worker or a stranger, but as someone who shared his values, his dedication, and his love for the land. Over the following weeks, their interactions became more natural. They shared meals and talked about their pasts, their families, and their dreams for the future. Clara told Jacob about her family farm, the struggles they had faced, and the hope that had driven her to leave home in search of a new beginning. Jacob shared memories of his late wife, the quiet life they had built together, and the loneliness that had followed her passing. Through these conversations, they discovered common ground. Both had faced loss and hardship, both had learned to be self-reliant, and both valued honesty, hard work, and integrity. They began to respect each other not just for their skills, but for their character. Slowly, trust deepened into friendship, and friendship hinted at something more. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept over the ranch. Rain poured down, and wind whipped through the trees. Clara and Jacob worked quickly to secure the animals and cover the crops. Despite the chaos, they moved together efficiently, their teamwork seamless. When the worst of the storm passed, they stood in the shelter of the barn, drenched and exhausted, but satisfied with their efforts. Jacob looked at Clara, a faint smile on his face. "We make a good team," he said. Clara laughed softly. "Yes, we do," she agreed. "I've never worked like this before. It feels fulfilling." Jacob nodded. "It is. The ranch is more than land and animals. It's a life. And life is better when shared with someone you trust." Clara felt her heart warm. She realized that she had not only found work but had also found a sense of belonging. She had earned Jacob's respect and friendship, and in return, he had given her a place where she could thrive. She no longer felt the fear or uncertainty that had gripped her when she first arrived. Instead, she felt confidence, purpose, and a quiet happiness she had not expected to find. As the months passed, Clara and Jacob continued to work side by side. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Fences were repaired, pastures were tended, and the animals grew healthy and strong. But more importantly, their relationship grew stronger. They learned to communicate openly, to share their thoughts and feelings, and to rely on each other in ways that went beyond work. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob invited Clara to sit on the porch with him. They watched the sky turn shades of orange and pink, the fields bathed in soft light. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, enjoying the calm and the sense of accomplishment that came from a day well spent. Clara finally spoke, her voice gentle. "Jacob, I've been thinking this ranch, the work, and everything we've built together. It means more to me than I expected. I've grown so much here, not just in skill, but as a person." Jacob nodded, his eyes softening. "I've noticed that too," he said. "You've proven yourself not just with your work, but with your character. You've brought life, energy, and trust back to this place, and you've brought a sense of hope to me as well." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. She realized that over time, her respect and admiration for Jacob had grown into something deeper, and she could see that he felt the same way. But there was no rush, no pressure, only the quiet understanding that their bond had developed naturally, built on shared experience, respect, and trust. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. Winter brought long nights by the fire, where they shared stories and dreams. Spring brought new life to the fields, and Clara marveled at the growth of the crops and the animals. Summer brought long, hot days filled with hard work and laughter. And through it all, their connection deepened, not through sudden decisions or demands, but through the steady, patient growth of mutual respect and understanding. One day, Jacob approached Clara with a small, gentle smile. "Clara," he said softly, "I've been thinking, you've been here for some time now, and I see the dedication, the care, and the loyalty you bring every day. I want to ask you something, but not as a demand or condition. I want to ask because I feel it is right." Clara looked at him, curious and attentive. "I would like you to continue being here, not just as a worker but as a partner," he said. "Not because of a contract or obligation, but because I trust you and I value you. If you are willing, I would like us to consider a life together, one built on mutual respect and shared effort." Clara felt her heart lift. This was not the sudden, impossible demand of the past. This was patient, thoughtful, and honest. She could feel the sincerity in his words and in the way he looked at her. She realized that the bond they had formed was genuine, built on months of shared work, trust, and understanding. "I would like that too," she replied softly. "Not because I was told to, but because I want to. I trust you, Jacob, and I feel that we can build something strong together." Jacob's face broke into a small, relieved smile. "Then we shall," he said simply. The days that followed were filled with quiet joy and companionship. They continued to work together, side by side, but now there was a deeper connection. They shared meals, stories, and laughter, and even the small moments, watching the sunrise, tending to the animals, repairing fences, felt meaningful. They had found not just partnership in work, but partnership in life. The community began to notice the change as well. Neighbors who had once whispered about the lonely rancher and the young woman who had arrived suddenly now spoke of their teamwork, their respect for each other, and the way they cared for the land. The ranch became a symbol of what could be achieved through dedication, honesty, and cooperation. Months later, in a quiet ceremony at the ranch, Clara and Jacob were married. It was simple and heartfelt, attended by a few neighbors and friends who had come to respect them both. They stood together in the open fields, surrounded by the animals and the land that had brought them together. There was no pressure, no rush, only the quiet joy of two people who had built trust, friendship, and love over time. Clara looked around at the ranch, at the home she had helped build and tended, and at Jacob, standing beside her. She realized how far she had come, from a young woman seeking work in desperation to someone who had found purpose, companionship, and love. And she knew that the future, while still uncertain in some ways, was bright because it was built on honesty, respect, and shared effort. Jacob, for his part, felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He had learned that trust and companionship could not be demanded, only earned. He had found someone who not only shared the work, but shared the values, hopes, and dreams that mattered most. And in Clara, he had found a partner for life, someone who understood him, challenged him, and inspired him to be better every day. As the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow over the ranch, Clara and Jacob stood together, hand in hand. The field stretched endlessly before them, the animals moved quietly, and the barn stood as a testament to hard work, patience, and dedication. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenges, and through it all they had grown, not just as individuals but as partners. The ranch was more than land, it was a home, and the bond they had formed was more than work. It was a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. And as the sky turned deep purple, dotted with stars, Clara and Jacob knew that the story of the lonely rancher and the determined young woman had reached a chapter of hope, growth, and lasting happiness.